Julie is on the National IONS Board at the moment, and she's had her finger in so many different pots, it's hard to make a definitive statement about who she is, but she's worked with many not-for-profit organizations and continues to do that, as well as IONS. And she has a background in philosophy and in chemical engineering, and she'll tell you the rest. It's enormous. Give a big welcome, please, to Julie Lapham.
Kind of introduce yourself.
Yeah.
People ask me why I take my shoes off. I'm sure you know. Good afternoon, everyone. Diane Willis, thank you, and thank you to Chicago Lions for bringing me all the way from Greensboro, North Carolina on a big plane to Chicago. The last time I was here was many, many, many years ago. Too long ago, when I was a chemical engineer and giving a lecture to the American Chemical Society. So it's really nice to come back under these circumstances. But thank you. I'm even happier to be here for Chicago Lions' 11th birthday, and I'm even happier to be your entertainment for the 11th birthday. So, you all know why I took my shoes off?
No.
Anytime I talk about my near-death experience, I take my shoes off.
To stay grounded?
Because I'm on hallowed ground every time I talk about this experience. I've talked about it for years and years and years, and each time I do, you may see tears come because it's very difficult to speak about this. It has moved my life in ways that I just didn't anticipate and still don't anticipate. So, when I was a kid growing up, whenever we went to visit family, we would take our shoes off at the door. Jill, anybody here do that?
Yeah.
Used to do? Yeah. Okay. So I'm entering a house. Oh. All right. I've been told that I've got to finish by 5 o'clock on the dot. So what I'd like to do is talk about my experience in 3 different sections. So I'd like to just share with you the literalness of what occurred. And then I'd like to give you a little bit of a preamble on where I was before I got to the event of my life. And then a little bit about what I'm doing after the event. And that's not going to take a whole lot of time. But I'd also like to open it up for questions afterwards, because I think sometimes it's better when we do a talk with each other. As a bit of a preamble, you can tell I've got a funny accent. It used to be a lot worse. Go blimey, stammy, righty pros. That kind of accent, like Liza Doolittle, when I first arrived in this country, nobody could understand me. I had a very broad Cockney accent, and I had to write everything down or draw pictures. So now I have a combination of New Jersey, Washington, D.C., Virginia, and now I'm practicing North Carolinian. I feel like a Heinz 57 variety, or a mutt of some description. Maybe I am. But anyway, just to get the language part out of the way. And if I say words that you don't understand, please just holler at me and say, "What'd you say?" And then we'll go back and repeat it. All right, I came to this country when I was 20 years old. I'd already graduated university. I had a chemical engineering degree. And yes, I was quite bright. That's what they told me. But a few years after that, I was 26 years of age, working for a blue chip chemical company in New Jersey, and working with polymers, meaning I have patents on flame retardants and permanent press. You all remember permanent press, don't you? They gave me $1 for that. I got $1. The company got the rest. But in order to test these flame retardants, we developed a specific test that would let us know how fast they burned, so that we could measure it. So that, you know, when you took carpeting or whatever, somebody's got a cell phone jingling.
Turning it off.
Turn y'all cell phones off, please.
Yep.
Can we turn that off behind you too?
You don't want me with a blue background?
No.
I thought blue was rather corporate.
Yes.
Yes, it's very professional.
It's beautiful.
I-
Yeah,
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Can you see me good? I mean, the filming's got to be right on.
But it's okay, either way. It's just a little bit distracting, but not that bad.
Can
You're
you turn
fine.
it to magenta?
I wouldn't worry about it, folks,
No.
because I'm not. So I was in the middle of testing these samples, and in those days we used the glass desiccator, which is a big glass bell jar about 14 inches in diameter with a sliding glass lid, quarter-inch thick. So I'm taking the lid off, and it shattered. And a piece of that glass slipped up my wrist, my right wrist, and it severed the ulnar artery, the ulnar nerve, and the tendon almost all the way through. Not quite, but almost all the way through. And I was alone in the lab at the time. And one of the things that I always ask myself is that, because when you work in a lab like that, there are weekly reminders of what to do in the case of an emergency. And we were always told, when the emergency hits, you go to the telephone and you hit the red button, and it puts all the emergency system into operation. Well, I was in this lab that was very long, and the telephone was all the way down there. And I was up here, and the door was right behind me. And I do remember looking at the telephone, and then I walked out the door. And as I walked out the door, my lab was the first lab by the elevator. Someone was coming out of the elevator, and I simply held my wrist up and I said, "Don, I need help." And I passed out from loss of blood. It was that fast.
Wow.
The next things that I remember is I remember the gurney arriving. I remember somebody tying my arm off, putting something tight around my arm. I remember being loaded into the ambulance. I remember the ride to the hospital in that my consciousness was coming and going. So there were times when I heard the sirens on the ambulance really clearly, and there were other times when it seemed like it was 10 miles away. It wasn't part of me at all. I remember being placed on the operating room table. I remember that huge dome light above me. And the next thing I remember is I'm on the ceiling looking down. And I had absolute audio clarity and visual clarity of every single thing they did to me in that operating room for several minutes. I flatlined within a very short period of time. Blood matching was called for, fibrillation units were called for. But I could describe the next day to my surgeon precisely who was doing what where, and who was running in and out of the room, and I mean, absolutely detailed with clarity. It was stunning what clarity I had over it. So I don't know how long I was up on the ceiling watching. They were cutting my favorite sweater off of me. You know what that does when you can't contact them? You know, when you're up there and you're watching them, and scissors cutting this off of me. Yeah, that was bad. So the next thing is I'm out in the universe, and there's this light. There's this white light. And it and I are moving towards each other. I don't know who was moving. It may have been both of us, because I don't recall seeing a tether. You know, when you're a researcher, you look for these things. But we were moving towards each other, and the light and I were getting closer and closer together. And I could see inside the light, and I could begin to see things inside the light. There were shapes. They were fuzzy, but there were shapes inside that light. There were animals, there were mountains, there were rivers, there were people, there was all kinds of things, but it was fuzzy. and yet we were still getting closer and closer and closer. And I don't remember hearing a voice. A lot of people do. But something made me turn. So whether I did hear a voice and I just don't have recall of it, I don't know. But I turned. And as I turned, I saw all the planets. Then I saw planet Earth. And I was connected to planet Earth with this little half-inch translucent ribbon just floating down. And as I saw all of that, it was over. I was back. That was the end of the scene. So that's the event as I can remember it. And I've spoken about this event to a number of different people on a number of different times, mostly church people, interestingly. And down where I come from, the best audience is Southern Baptists. I hope there's nothing here that I'm insulting.
Praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Amen.
Amen.
That's it. Okay. So, yes. So that's the event. All right. Now, the preamble to this that is important from my perspective, it might not be from yours, but the important piece for me was that I was born towards the end of the Second World War. And on my mother's side of the family, we're Jewish. And I think simply because Germany was too close to England, I was not raised with any religious, spiritual teachings whatsoever. I happened to end up going to a Church of England Sunday school simply because the minister lived next door and he owned a Harley Davidson. And I got to ride on it. But that ended when I discovered that archery also took place at the same time on Sundays, and I didn't have to go to Bible study anymore. I could go to archery. So that's just giving you a sense of what kind of character I am. You know, like even when I was younger, you know, I get out of these things. But I say that because I really didn't have any religious training per se. And yet, if I say to you that that light was the universal omnipotence, I knew it was God. I knew it was everything. I don't know why I know that, but I know that in every cell in my body. And that's the part that informs my day, every day since that accident until today. And I'm sure it's going to continue to inform it. I have seen that light 4 times since. The year after the accident, because there was insufficient time to deal with the major artery that had been severed. The artery was tied. And so a year later, they went back in and did a little vein transplant from the back of my hand and spliced it into the artery that had been tied. That was a 7-hour piece of microsurgery, and the light was right there. And not only was the light there, but now I'm a little more friendly with it. See, now we can have a conversation. And so when that piece of surgery was over with, and the surgeon came around, and I said, how long before I can go home? Because hospitals are really not the place to hang out in. I mean, the food's rotten. It's just not a good place to be. I wanted to go home. And the doctor said, well, you can go home when your lungs are empty from water and your respiration's down where it should be, and yada, yada, yada. So I said to my surgeon, come back tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. And he came back at 10 o'clock the next morning, and I went home that afternoon. Just because of my conversations with that light. Okay? 2 other times I've seen that light, and it has been during meditation practice. And it generally occurs when I least expect it. You know, I teach meditation every Monday night. It's a free class for the community. I've been doing it for 4 years now. And we have about 100 people that show up for meditation class every Monday night at the church. It's ironical. And I could be sitting there and, I don't know, it doesn't seem to have to do with whether I'm in a good mood or not, although I generally am. It doesn't matter whether I've had a stressful day. All of a sudden, the light appears. And then I do that awful thing, I go to grasp it, and it disappears. So it's happened twice, although I keep saying, you know, I'm available if you want to come back. If you want to come back, I'm available. But when I say to you that I'm basically a researcher, I really am. And so even though I came to this country and I'm a chemical engineer and a researcher in chemistry and photosynthesis, the thing that happened for me over this experience was I wanted to know where I went. I want to know how I get back there, and I want to get back there without dying. You see, I know there's a way back there. And I also know there's a way back there without drugs. But maybe we'll talk about that later on. But plant medicines, we call them. Plant medicines. When you're British, you say plant medicines. When you're not British, it's plant medicines. Plant medicines. So I wanted to be able to get back there. And one of the things that happened after the first accident, not the vein transplant, but the accident itself, was that my surgeon, when he came around that next day and I detailed everything that happened to me, he says to me, we often hear these kinds of stories from people who have had the kind of trauma that brought you here. So I knew I wasn't crazy. And I also knew there were other people who had had these kinds of experiences and touched these other territories. But I wanted to know who they were. I wanted to know how I could go get them. And so he suggested that I go begin to practice meditation. The Swami Rama, y'all remember him, the Swami Rama had just arrived in this country with the Menninger Institute, was doing lowering respiration research. He's the fellow that laid on the bed of nails and lowered his respiration down to 5, 6, 7 beats per minute. And he also told Dr. Menninger that he could stop his heart at will. Well, that's not really the question, is it? If he stops his heart at will, what part of him starts it back up again? That's the question.
Yeah.
Little cyanide will do that for anybody.
And I don't think Dr. Menninger ever put him to the test, but I started studying with the Swami all kinds of hatha yoga, all kinds of meditation, biofeedback, and it went from there. Muktananda, Satchidananda, all the teachers that came, I just spent time and time and time and time, and eventually found Stanislav Grof, who some of you know, the father of transpersonal psychology, and certainly the daddy of consciousness research, who began his career, modern day career, studying LSD. That's where that came from. So just to give you a very brief kind of synopsis on what happened to me after that accident, and a little bit about what happened before. Now, what am I doing now? I'm teaching meditation. I don't think my family really understands anything. I tried to tell my dad about my near-death experience, and I got about 5 minutes into it, and he said, well, you've always had an active imagination. So that killed that. But the other part of it was, I had absolutely no desire to continue in my 6-figure salary job. It wasn't heartfelt enough. So I did have to return to college because the accident was severe enough to give me a permanent disability. It doesn't look like it, but I have I think it was adductor. It was the adductor motion that I don't have. Anyway, it was back to university, another set of undergraduate degrees. This time it's communication, and the intention was to go to law school, which I didn't do because I had it up to here with school at that point. I wanted to play a little bit. So now I work with nonprofits. Now I teach meditation, and after meeting Stan Grof and having my first holotropic breathwork experience, I did not go back to the accident, but I went back to another room in the same house. In other words, the audio and the visual clarities were very similar. And so it was sort of like, this is a way I can get back there. I can get back there with more holotropic breathwork. So that's what I did. I've been teaching holotropic breathwork and experiencing it for the last 20 years. So I must like it. And that's another thing. It's sort of like all that I do today is what I like to do. It's about what I enjoy doing. What amazes me is how this light works with you. We were talking a little bit, Diane and I were talking a little bit yesterday and even a bit the day before about this. And it's sort of like, I don't have to worry about things. In fact, I really don't have to worry about anything. All I sort of have to do is show up and pay attention and listen. And sometimes I feel like I'm a little digby, a little dinghy without an oar on a river, just kind of going down. And, once in a while I kind of bop into a rock or do whatever. But that's kind of how I feel that my life has been. I'm grateful for every ounce, every moment that I get. The gratitude in my life has just embellished itself. Gratitude that I didn't think I would ever have. So, what else do I need to tell you before I let you ask questions? Here comes a question.
I had the unfortunate distinction of coming in a moment late, and I didn't have the privilege of hearing your name.
Oh, I'm anonymous.
Oh, I am anonymous, and I was anonymous after you.
Anonymous
Anonymous.
is what it is. I don't know, there's flyers around. Julie.
Julie,
They
okay.
call me Julie.
All right.
Julie Lapham. There's something else I do need to share with you because on the flyers, and I don't know whether Diane mentioned it, but somebody did in the audience that I was part Cherokee. I'm really not. What I had said to Diane at some point was, my Cherokee grandmother calls me an Oyana, and that is because there is a woman in my life that's been in my life for about 30 years who is Cherokee grandmother, grandmother, and I call her my Cherokee grandmother, but there is no lineage. However, one of the things that happened to me, one of the many, many near deaths that I've had emotionally and spiritually, is that my father died about 15 years ago, and I went back to England to do the perfunctory things that you do when your dad dies. And I'm an only child, so I had to go do this, get all his stuff, and figure out where it was all going to go and all that. So my aunt says to me, Julie, sit down, I've got something to tell you. Now you know those are not good words, don't you?
Right.
The minute your aunt says to you, sit down, I've got something to tell you, that's an indicator. Your father's not your biological father. Oh, was anybody ever going to tell me? Here I am, late 50s, when were you all going to tell me? Well, Mom passed away very young. My mother died at 48 years of age from ALS. It's a horrible. She died. So, and on her deathbed, she told her sister that my father was not my biological father. Don't you ever tell Julie.
Oh, terrible.
So she didn't until my father passed away, and then she thought, well, now there's nothing to lose. Except I had very little way of finding out whether it was true or not. So anyway, my aunt tells me, your father's not your biological father, to which I responded, who is? And then I said, was he Indian? To which my aunt said, I don't know, but he was American, and he lived close to where you are living, and he used to carry beads and feathers with him. Okay? My mom and her sisters worked for the American Red Cross in London during the war. So I knew he had to have been an injured American, native, from around where I'm from. Now, I've already had 3 or 4 very close encounters with the Iroquois, with a tribe called the Tuscarora. And the strange thing about this is that I had been invited to their powwow one time. And I knew the songs, and I knew the words. And they knew me, and I knew them. I got invited to the teepee. I got invited to sit and to eat. And so it's like, yeah, okay. So I go down to the Clan Mothers, which is in Pembroke, North Carolina, and I sat there and I told them my story. And they just nodded, as Native Americans are wanting to do. Don't tell you a whole lot. But just to let you know that I have since been allowed to make my first drum, which is a 16-inch drum and not a 13-inch drum, which is normally the first one you make, because they said I had to have a bigger voice. And I said to them, but you don't know me, my voice, I don't have a problem with my voice. And they said, but you're going to be listened to differently. And so you need the 16-inch drum. So not only have I made my 16-inch drum, but I've danced at the powwow. So my assumption is that the Clan Mothers of the Tuscarora know who my father is. My sense is he's still alive. My sense is he has a family, and he probably doesn't know he's got me. That's my sense. And there's a sense about this that I'm going to find out sooner or later. But in the meantime, it looks as though I'm part Tuscarora, part Jewish. Isn't that great? Yes, sir. Are you too, huh?
I'm Jewish and not Tuscarora at all.
We'll have to initiate you.
So far as I know, both families Jewish back to the beginning, but that's a different topic. We shared a couple interesting things. One is we both had near-death experiences with cut wrist. Mine was at age 5. I fell through a glass door. I cut all the tendons.
This is not about you.
Excuse me, sir, I have something to share with this, and it is about her, and it is about us, and we are all one. And what harms one harms us all, and what helps one helps us all. Therefore, in the name of the one of which I am a part, and of which we are all a part, I ask that only the best possible results come about from this brief conversation, and that you not interrupt until I finish one sentence. One sentence. What I wanted to share is that this falling through the glass door turned out initially to be a possible tragedy, the loss of my hand. That would have lost my current branch of the median nerve. So you could have died easily from blood loss. We both came back close. And in retrospect, it was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. And I feel it was not an accident, that it was at some other level planned. And I wanted to know whether or not you felt the same way. I derived many, many benefits from it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I cannot imagine where I would be today if I continued on my track with Allied Chemical Corporation. I cannot imagine. Because at the time, I thought I was doing the world a great favor. And, doing the world a great favor by inventing certain kinds of flame retardants and certain kinds of additives that would help permanent press that in retrospect were not biodegradable. So, 10, 15 years later, you find out that there's a green problem with all of this. And I am eternally grateful for this shift. And it was a shift. It was 180 degrees, if not more. And there's a part of me that really, I think from the very beginning of the accident, recognized that this was an okay thing. And I know that I'm probably in the minority when I say that. But my family has always taken to the challenge. And that's part of it. Part of it is to rise to the challenge. And just returning back to school and going through another 4 years of school and dealing with 2 years worth of therapy, which is what it took to get this hand even to begin to work. By the time all of that was done, I'm 32 years of age. And it's sort of like that chunk of my life had kind of moved on by. You know, all my friends have gotten married. It's like, well, where the heck is everybody? What are we going to do on Saturday night? But there's nobody there to play anymore because they're all off doing their thing, and here I am. And so I kind of just threw myself into my work. But my workload changed. I started doing lots of community work. I left Allied Chemical. I went to Washington, D.C. I started working for the Equal Rights Amendment Campaign. For those of you women and men in the audience that believe in basic equality, went all over the country learning how to organize, doing all kinds of public relations work. Left Washington, D.C. in 1982 after helping to write the Gender Gap Report, which is the very first time that women and men were voting differently for different reasons. Women basically were voting for long-range planning and for the children and for education, and men were primarily voting for the short term and for more warlike issues, but certainly short term. And a year after that, I went on down to Richmond, Virginia, where I was director of Common Cause, for those of you who know about Common Cause. For 15 years, yes, great organization.
In Richmond?
In Richmond, Virginia, I was the state director. Yes.
I was a medical student, and I was in Washington.
And I was on the staff of the Medical College of Virginia, which is where we started our first little IANS group 30 years ago.
Where I was a student.
Where he was a student. So we've sort of crossed paths, clearly. And clearly we're going to continue that. Yes, ma'am.
Can you mention what is the holotropic breath do?
What is holotropic breath work? Does anybody here know what that is? Yay. Good for you. All right. It's, well, let's see. How should I present this? Anybody besides you knows who Stan Grof is? G-R-O-F. Okay, so you know he's the father of transpersonal psychology, and he's the daddy of modern consciousness research. And modern consciousness research actually based on something called LSD. Back in the days when Dr. Hoffman created LSD, which, by the way, Hoffman LaRoche was looking for an aid to women and their menses. So we got screwed again. Never mind. But anyway, so that's what they were looking for. And so they found this little substance that relieved certain pain in certain areas and do what they do today, which is send it around to major universities to have them tested. So Stan Grof is in Prague University and ingested it and had the experience of, the beginning of the universe, the cataclysmic beginning. And he's scratching his head because he's working at that time with people who are institutionalized with mental illness, sort of saying, my patients do this all the time, naturally, and here I've got a chemical now that's letting me do it. So of course he didn't become the Freudian psychiatrist, he became a transpersonal psychiatrist. And LSD was introduced into many institutions to help heal major mental illness. He came to this country and started working with Johns Hopkins University, became the director of the Maryland Psychiatric Institute. And at that time, LSD research was being done at Harvard by the boys, right? The boys. Ram Dass, Richard Alpert. I know him as Richard, I don't know about you, but I knew him when he was Richard in Ithaca. We had this big house, never mind. So all the boys at Harvard were doing all the LSD research. Everything was going fine until the LSD got out of setting, and it got loose in the community. And then people were, dropping acid on a Friday night, and becoming birds and, climbing up to tall buildings and jumping off expecting to fly and killing themselves, and it was just a mess. So it became illegal. Stan's response to that was to create a process whereby you could contact the same territories as you could in an LSD session, but you could do it naturally. And so he took a deeper, faster breathing, sort of like a pranayama. He took a particular kind of sound, which is mostly indigenous, and begins sort of in the earth with drumming and didgeridoo music, and some of it skips the temporal lobe and goes right into the pineal gland. And the memories, cellular memories that we have retained in our memory banks are touched and triggered and brought to the surface. And so whether that's through hallucinations or audio hallucinations but sensory hallucinations of different types. And in a 3-hour session, which is about half the time of an LSD session, you can touch a variety of different territories that have an incredible healing propensity to them. There's one added piece at the end of 3 hours with a facilitator. There's a little piece of body work that can, or you don't have to have it, but oftentimes when you've been breathing for a little bit and listening to this music, there's a stuckness that occurs. And so there's a little bit of body work that takes place at the participant's discretion until you feel complete. That's it. That's holotropic breath work. It's very, very powerful.
Can you make that sample for a second? How does it sound? Can you give a sample?
It's the sound. The sound in. I don't understand.
Can you give an example? Can you walk us through a
You
little?
begin with drumming. All right, it's in the earth, so it's drumming, didgeridoo music to begin with, and then it kind of goes all the way around and comes up into the ethereal, choral music. Most of it's indigenous from all around the world.
Would a recording work as well as the actual drum?
Well, I use tapes, so I use recorded. If you want samples of the music, I would say anything by the Grateful Dead. Especially Mickey Hart, who is the drummer who is working with the Smithsonian to restore and capture indigenous drumming that is very quickly getting lost. But he's put together at least 2 CDs at this moment that are capturing indigenous music that's just from Bali, from the islands, from Africa, from all over. Excellent.
Could you
Yes.
say it
Yeah, I
again?
have a question about the, because I did some shamanic work,
Mm.
where there's a tempo drumming that induces trance
Mhm.
for journeying. And what I'm hearing is something that's similar to that. Is that,
In case you're not hearing the question in the back there, the question is, and I'm paraphrasing this, so yell at me if I'm off, is that there's a similarity between what I just described and shamanic trance work. And yes, there is a similarity. And yes, any plant medicines, any of the shamanic practices from all over the world that use plant medicines, and they all do, whether it's peyote, ayahuasca, psilocybin, kava kava, it really doesn't matter what continent you go onto. There are shamans who know how to use the native plants. Those native plants, for the most part, are hallucinogens. Some of them, like ayahuasca, are also a purge. And the new drug that's just been discovered from Africa is called ibogaine. It's not, we can't synthesize it yet in this country, which is interesting. So there's 2 iboga houses. One is in Tijuana, and one is just across the Canadian border. And for people struggling with heroin addiction, which is a nasty addiction, it's a very sweet drug, to detox someone and to get them to these iboga houses and have one ibogaine session, that's all you need. That's all you need. Takes 5 days.
Can you spell that? Ibogaine?
Ibogaine, Ibogaine. If you want more information, there's a wonderful website called MAPS, MAPS.org. That's the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.org. They have everything listed from around the world, all the research that's being done, and the various stages of the research. We have a project at University of South Carolina using MDMA, which is ecstasy, and 2 shots, 3 months apart, for our returning soldiers from Baghdad and from Afghanistan. Just 2 shots over a 3-month period turns the pictures off. Wow. Turns the pictures off. So, wonderful stuff being done. The research at the University of South Carolina has been extended by the Food and Drug Administration, so they're now going into their 4th year. So if there's anyone that you know of that has a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, they qualify for this program.
What is the book? What is the book where they do this? For the post-stress syndrome?
Can you give us
Where?
the details, the
And
details? How do you contact them?
Contact MAPS.org.
Okay.
It's all on MAPS.org. And if you don't get the information at MAPS, then simply email them and ask about the post-traumatic stress disorder research at the University of South Carolina. It's Michael Mithofer. And he's been on television, he's been on Fox News, he's been on everything. I mean, it's just incredible stuff that they're doing. There's a study at Harvard for people struggling with migraines and cluster headaches using LSD. So there's all kinds of, it's kind of interesting because, you know, plant medicines are illegal in this country, so what the FDA has to do is synthesize them all, because we can't use them naturally. Isn't that silly? They synthesize them all, and then Michael will tell a story of how the drugs came down from the FDA to the University of South Carolina under armed guard. And you can walk out on the street and get ecstasy, you know, for $10. But it came under armed guard and it's locked up in like 3 safes. But it has to be. I'm making light of it, but it has to be. Yes, sir.
There is also the work of Dr. Michael Schlosser, who is married to the living Cynthia Schlosser. Michael died 2 years ago. He pioneered the paralyzed post-traumatic stress syndrome treatment by rapid alternate eye movement while discussing the problem in patients, and took hundreds of PSD patients out of it without drugs at all. Michael Schlosser, it's in the lit, and many of these works also incorporate his project.
There's an additional component to the shamanistic work, however, that is different to what's just been mentioned. It's very, very important. It has to do with the spiritual component of healing. Now, when Stan Grof talks about it, he talks about there's an intellectual aspect. You know, you can will yourself into certain illnesses, you can will yourself out of them. There's an emotional part, there's a spiritual part, and there's a physical part. And there might even be more, for all we know. But that spiritual component is huge. And the problem with just simply addressing the physical body is that the spiritual aspect gets overridden. One of the things I've noticed, and I've kind of been associated with IANS for about 35 years, is that, and I'm part of the Spiritual Emergence Network, so people will call and they'll tell me the stories. And what's amazing to me is, and I think the most powerful part of the healing mechanism is the spiritual aspect. Because I know from my perspective, I don't know that I could have imagined that I could have this amount of gratitude. I couldn't imagine that I could have this amount of gratitude for waking up in the morning, for going to sleep at night, for good stuff and yucky stuff that's in my life. It's changed my life in so many. Somebody talked about it earlier about there's no words. There are no words. If I say to you, there's no words. You know, I can play with words, but it still doesn't touch the depth that I feel with this light. Susan Blackmore has done a lot of research around near-death studies and using virtual reality. And Susan is at the University of Sussex in England, so she's a good old British person. And she and I have regular email back and forth because they have done this whole set of virtual research around, you know what virtual, you kind of get plugged in with devices and you get put into another setting and you get taken as though you're going to die. And they have recorded all the things that happen to the brain. The ketamine excretes, the NAG excretes, the neural pathways light up, you've got the light at the end of the tunnel, yada, yada, yada. Great, whoopee. It doesn't do a thing for the spiritual aspect, which is the one thing that's missing in this piece of research. And Susan and I talk about this all the time. I mean, this is great research, and it's very linear, and it's very intellectual. But for me, it's that spiritual part that has changed my life, not the rest of it. Yes, ma'am.
I think that's a really important point. I think it's hard to talk to the scientific community about the spiritual because we are so ingrained in material realism. And if it's not material, if we're talking about a component that's not an epiphenomenon of the brain or produced out of a material world, it's still, I realized with myself how mired I was in it, even though for many years I've been, it's so hard to talk about it and so hard to put a piece in. And indeed, the research can't be the same research. The research has to be the experience with meditation and going and doing that extent, not the one with the five senses or their extensions. And that's what gets so difficult. So that we see the brain as a level, but not the causal level, or the body as a level of something that has many, many ways of manifesting.
And that's when I struggle for words. It's real easy to get on the scientific end, and I work with a nonprofit called Bemis Institute actually we're housed in Richmond, but I do research in Greensboro. We just finished a study with a headache wellness center, which primarily for migraines and cluster headaches. We've got an 80% correlation between, are you all ready for this? An 80% correlation between migraines and forceps delivery.
Oh,
wow. 80% correlation between migraine headaches and forceps delivery. The same percentage, 80% correlation between migraines, forceps delivery, and loss of direction. So a lot of Stan Grof's work has to do with the imprinting that occurs during the birth process, from conception all the way through until the myelinization of the cortex occurs at 10 months of age. So from 10 months, the first 10 months of your life, and then the 9 months of in the womb, 19 months, and depending on your belief system, a few days prior to that, depending on who wants to agree to do what in this next life, all of that occurs prior to the myelinization of the cortex. So the memory of it all is in the body. It's in the cells. Now, the minute the myelinization occurs, it's like a filing system, and the brain goes crazy trying to. But then comes fight or flight. Oh, I remember that. That was not a good experience. Let's put it in this folder. So there's an awful lot of consciousness research, if you will, that has to do with pre and perinatal activity. And there's a fellow by the name of Emerson, William Emerson, E-M-E-R-S-O-N, who actually has, it's sort of like a holotropic breathwork training, but it's a training primarily for nurses who are in the neonatal units, so that they can use a certain kind of massage, a certain kind of body work for babies that come here with particular traumas, whether it's the umbilical cord wrap, whether the water has decided not to break, whether it's a dry birth, all of these things that provide a trauma base to the memory unit that then, as we develop, gets triggered. So if I want to talk about my healing, then I think starting with the near-death in 1972 and continuing with lots and lots of breath work and lots of other shamanic journeys that I've participated in and will continue to participate in, because I feel what's happening with me is I'm becoming more and more of a conduit, and I'm not holding on to things that have nothing to do with me. If I tell you that I've lost my fear of death, that's not literal. I mean, it is, but the bigger picture is, somebody asked me at break time, when do you stop getting nervous? When do you stop worrying about nervousness when you're going to do a talk? So I don't care what you think about me. I don't care what you think about me. That is a death. You got me? That is, I don't care what you think. I am not standing here to make nice with y'all. I'm standing here to tell you what my learnings have been. If you can take something from that, great. But that's what's added to becoming a conduit for me, is I am relinquishing. I can't control how you think about me.
Right.
I can't control whether you're saying it's just full of stuff or not. I don't know. I can only tell you what I'm telling you and trust that it's going to be what it's going to be. But if I start worrying about controlling, and I think that's 99% of our problem collectively, is what I can control and what I can't control. I certainly can't control you. All I can do with you is give you the one thing that I can take away from my near death, and that is to love you unconditionally. And unconditionally means I love you without any expectation of return. Love is giving without any expectation of return. I don't even know if I'm ever going to see y'all again. I might. I don't know. But you get my drift? It's hard to do that. It's hard to do that, especially when you've got a family member or somebody's coming up in your face and they're being rotten and mean to you. I mean, there's a part of you who wants to be rotten and mean right back. Bless you.
So what you are saying is you're being dead to the funny self, to the self that we make up believe in this world, and being alive in the true original self that God created in each one of us. Being the real self, integrity. That's beautiful. That's what Christ came to.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think that's what all the great teachers come here to do. And all the little teachers. I mean, I don't think it has to be a great teacher. I think that's what children give us, for goodness sake. That's what animals give us, for goodness sake. It's like it's all around. All we have to do is look. And for the most part, listen. I mean, Einstein, one of the greatest scientists in the world, said, if you want to know how the universe works, go sit and watch. It doesn't take much. We don't need 30,000 books to tell us how to do it. We've got it all. We've got all the information in the world within us. It may be below the horizon. It might be in the subconscious. But we have it. All we have to do is tap into it. And I know that's, all we have to do is tap into it, but that's all we have to do is tap into it. But we've got it. The cells that each one of you came here with are from your moms, your dads, your grandmas, your granddads, your great, all the way back to the beginning.
And their cellular memories.
You have it all. And you brought with you everything that they had. So not only are we all connected, that goes without saying, but your stuff is their stuff. Their stuff is your stuff. Your stuff is your stuff. We all got stuff. That's a bumper sticker, isn't it? We all got stuff. Is your hand up?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I thought you were just resting.
wave it to it. Okay, so you think that a very important time is the perinatal time, the prenatal time, the perinatal time. If you had a very, no real significant trauma during that time, but you have trauma later in your life, is there thought that you've myelinated your brain, you can kind of compartmentalize that trauma and it doesn't really affect your body or your spirit or even your psyche in a major way? Because I've had patients that have had trauma outside that time that has been very...
Might not be theirs, might not be yours, might be your great-great-grandmother's
Their trauma?
that's moving through you.
Myism.
Now, this is pretty stunning because we're seeing a lot of it now. There's 3 major energies that are rising up right now. German is 1, Gaelic is 1, Japanese is 3. 1, 2, 3. German energy, Gaelic, Irish Gaelic energy, and Japanese energy is coming up. And what we are seeing, we don't have enough to even write a research paper, but what we're seeing in holotropic breathwork is that for the most part, people who come to experience are skipping a generation or 2, and they are having the experiences of their grandparents or their great-grandparents.
What do you mean, exactly?
Very profound. Very,
Can you narrow that down for us? We can wrap our head around that one?
Can I narrow it down for you? What do you need?
Yeah, give us an example. Just
Okay.
make up an example.
Okay. Okay. One of the people that I've been working with for the last maybe 10 years, she came to me as a 14-year-old. Her mother brought her as a 14-year-old who had suddenly started to have strange dreams. She, up until that point, was a grade A student. And all of a sudden, these dreams were just knocking the socks off of her, and her grades were diminishing. She'd been to all kinds of doctors, gotten all kinds of medications. Nothing was happening. Nothing was working. So we started doing breathwork. On the 3rd session, that's all it took, on the 3rd session, the young kid sat up in the middle of the section and said, "Give me a pad. I want to draw a picture." And she drew a picture. And it was very detailed. It was a picture from the inside of a farmhouse looking out. And she drew the room and then what was outside. And I said to her when the session was over, I said, "Can we show this to your mom?" And she said yes. So I showed it to Mom. Mom burst into tears. It was her mother's farmhouse in Germany. And the granddaughter walked through all the memories of grandmother's experiences with some not very nice atrocities. In detail, in vivid detail.
How does she
The
heal
kid
it?
did not know.
How does she heal it? The healing process.
Well, most times the healing process is simply recognizing what's going on and simply having it rise up. You know, it means that it's not trapped in your body anymore. I mean, there are some researchers, I don't know that there's any kind of research to back this up, but there are some people that believe that the stress and tension that we hold in different parts of our body eventually become illness. Okay, you're okay with that? And that once that starts to release, it's the autonomic nervous system is releasing the receptors around the molecules. I mean, a lot of it's Candace Pert's work. If you're not familiar with Candace, Molecules of Emotion is a really fine read. It's very interesting. She's up at George Mason University, I believe. Candace Pert, P-E-R-T. Candace Pert, neuroscientist. Very interesting work she's done. Yes. Did I get done with what I was saying? Did I finish
So
that?
is it a reincarnation, or is it just kind of like a spiritual or cellular?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what these words mean. I don't know what karma means. I don't know what reincarnation means. I don't even know what these pre and perinatal memories really mean or imply. I think we're looking at something that's kind of brand new, We don't, I mean, the first thing we want to do is put it in a box and put a title over it. And I think there are too many different disciplines working on the same thing that have all these different words. And perhaps if we looked at things more holistically, we wouldn't do that. But it seems to be fairly fragmented in how we look at things. But I think there's more of a holistic piece that's coming through, and we just have to watch it and be aware and know what's going on. Lots of this kind of stuff is not reported by the regular news media. It's certainly not reported by traditional medicine.
Can I make a suggestion?
Hang on. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to share an experience I had 3 weeks ago. I was in Italy and got locked on a bus, and the guy was speaking Italian, but I got this sense of Nazi. The word Nazi kept coming to my head. And when I went to sleep, he kept coming into my psychic field. And so I said, what is it? And I got that healing the collective consciousness for my ancestors with Jewish Nazi and all the prejudice and everything like that. So I just wanted to share that was exactly what kind of came into my mind, because I felt like this experience was happening, it was happening for a reason, and I said, and I couldn't leave it alone. Like, it kept coming into me till I asked what it was for, and then he disappeared and everything disappeared. And that was just 3 weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago, so I just wanted to share.
Blessings. One thing to say back to you all, when you get these senses, don't dismiss them. Don't dismiss them. You might not have words for what you're sensing, but don't dismiss them. I mean, that's what I would give you back, is to say don't dismiss.
No, I didn't, and then I just
don't
said,
dismiss it.
forgive all the hatred. I mean, I just kind of did a prayer and say, forgive it all and set it free.
Excuse me.
That's great. Great. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
What do you think about the role of synchronicity? Groff wrote a book called When the Impossible Happens, and Jung also thought it was rather important. What is your take on that?
I have a clue.
Repeat the question, please.
What's the role of synchronicity? I mean, I just think it's one of those words that I'm not sure what it means.
Well, when strange...
No, I understand. I mean, I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying back to you that
Do
I,
you notice it?
Yeah,
Groff
I-
his wife and he seem to think that if you're doing something in the right way, you will find that it is the right way, because you'll suddenly start noticing many, many synchronicities.
well, yeah, I wouldn't. Did you all hear that, by the way? This is all about synchronicity. This is all about what do we think about synchronicity, and it's Groff's latest book has written about synchronicity, and the comment is that when you're on the right path, that the synchronicities occur more rapidly. And for me personally, I don't know that I would use the word synchronicity, but I do notice that if a door that I'm sort of playing with is starting to close for me, that I don't fight it. I used to when I was younger. I'd knock that door down as hard as I could. But I don't do that anymore. I let it close, and then I wait. And generally, with a little bit of time and a little bit of prayer, a little bit of meditation, another door opens up. And the way that I recognize, and this might be synchronicity, when I go through the open door, everything is smooth. It all opens up. I don't have to work hard. I think Diane may have added this into the little blurb about me, but I was out at lunch recently with somebody who said, how do you design your career? And I haven't designed my career since 1972 when I had the near-death experience. And at the end of that near-death experience, I said to the light, I'm yours. Do with me as you will. And tell me, and I'm going to come back and check with you, but I'm yours. And I haven't interviewed for a job since then, and I've had several. They just show up. People will call and say, well, you want to do this, yeah, sure, sounds good. And and Diane called and said, "You want to come to Chicago?" Sure, I'll come to Chicago. It's not, I plan nothing anymore. It's a trust that I have with that light. But when that door opens and I begin that journey through it, that I am loved, I am wanted, I am taken care of, there's nothing that I have to worry about. Nothing. And right now I'm at a stage in my life where I'm about to, quote, formally retire, because I'm pushing 65. But my 401k has virtually disappeared. It scares the bejeebus out of me, you know? I mean, it's like I had planned a little bit of retirement, not a whole lot, but a little bit, and it's just not there anymore. And every once in a while I get really worried about it. And I can feel the tension in my own body worrying, and like 3 days later, it gets taken care of. Either a job shows up, or someone sends a check, or it resolves itself. And then there's this bizarre, I can hear the laugh. You know, it's like that cosmic joke, you can hear the laugh. It's just laughing at you saying, "Gotcha." You know, it's like, okay.
We knew your account was
And I go through this all the time. I mean, it's like, you know, that human part gets really tense and worried, and then there's this other part that doesn't. Diane has been jumping up and down in the back there.
Not really, I just wanted to add my 2 cents on synchronicity.
Yes.
In the Bible it says all things work together for the good of he who loves God.
Yeah.
And I think that's there with the Bible's way of talking about synchronicity.
Yeah. And whether you want to use the word God or universal omnipotence or collective unconsciousness, I don't think it matters too much. I do a lot of talks, as I said before, to the Southern Baptists. And you know, I go cautiously, but I end up talking about God because I think that is the universal wisdom, whatever that is. And I don't know, for me it's that light.
Please.
Yes.
I wanted to try to tie together 3 things that you said in the concept. The first thing was that what you have learned is universal love from your experience, and I too have learned that, and discovered that partly I kept getting these experiences because I didn't get it right. I kept being angry, and anger isn't the right solution against something that's happened to you. It's recognition that it happened for a purpose. You may not know what it is. I have an uncle who happens to live in Greensburg, North Carolina, who I have this anger relationship with, and he has money and I don't. We'll loan, and we get into these discussions, and I talked to Dr. Schlosser's wife the other day, and she says, "Harvey, you probably ticked off one of his relatives 8 generations back. It may not even be him. Don't only apologize to him. Say, thank you, I'm sorry, I appreciate what you have done for me. Please forgive me," to him and all 10 generations back through time, because we are all telepathic. And we are not only telepathic with each other, but we are telepathic with beings that we are not even aware of, who know we're here doing things, who have either good or bad wishes for us. So the best thing that we can do is to ask for forgiveness and to accept forgiveness.
There is something to be said about anger, because I think that rage in particular is something that we tend to shy away from and have difficulty dealing with. When someone is in front of us and they're rageful, it's almost as though they're uncontrollable. And that happens whether it's drug-induced or alcohol-induced or just plain meanness-induced. It doesn't matter. But I want to just put out a couple of cents worth here about anger. I like anger.
Me too.
I like anger. I'd much rather have somebody who is aggressive than somebody who's depressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I say that because with someone who's depressive, it's just anger in reverse. But you have to pull it out. And that's mighty, mighty hard. It's a lot easier for me, especially with guys, and I do a lot of DUI sessions with people. The judges send these big guys to me. It's really funny. This one guy came in one time. He must have been over 6 foot tall. He must have weighed about 300 pounds. And he looks down at me and he says, "I'm going to kill you." And I said, "No, you're not. Get out of here. No, you're not." So we did a breathwork session. And at the end of it, I just asked him, you know, how you doing? And he said, I've got this pain in the middle of my back. And I said, okay, roll over on your belly. And he did. And it was a spot about the size of a quarter that was very hot in the middle of his shoulder blades. And I was sitting alongside him, and I just put my thumb on him. No leverage, no strength from me at all. And he was just writhing on the floor, screaming, crying, pounding. I mean, let me go, and all these kinds of things. I'm just sitting there doing this. And it lasted for like maybe 5 or 6, 7 minutes. And then he just started crying. And when he got done, he sat up and he said, you know, it felt as though I had been speared between my shoulder blades. And I said, how's it feel now? He said, mighty fine. And it's been about 8 years he hasn't had a drink since. So I call that healing. I don't know what you'd call it. But the thing about holotropic breath work is that it's an empowerment process from you to the light. The only role the facilitator plays is to be simply a facilitator, play the music, make sure you're safe. But it's you. It has to do with how you relate to the light, to God, to whatever name you want to call it. How do you relate to it? It's an inner thing. It's not an external thing. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any comments about bipolar disorder?
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. Well, because there's 2 or 3 different types of bipolar disorder. I mean, the analysis is now somewhat different, but we've had some instances where bipolar disorder is directly related to, you ready for this? During the labor process, medications get introduced. And because it happens to be on a Friday, and you're living in a rural area, and the doctor's not going to show up for a couple of days because it's the weekend, the legs are tied together. And come Monday morning, when the doc arrives, and the fetus has now gone very little, massive doses of medications to get it to move may just be bypassed and an incision and a C-section occur. One of the ways that I ask people is, what day of the year were you born? And if they tell me a Monday, there's a good indication that there's been something held back in the labor process, especially if they're born not in a city but in a rural area.
July 1
I
is
have to
bad,
say,
too.
as a physician, I've never, ever heard of that.
Oh, let me introduce
Or
you to
no-
at least 30 people I'm currently working with who have had their legs tied together. One quite recently, actually, where the fetus was actually pushed back in and the legs were tied.
Here in this country.
In this country, yes, ma'am.
So the effect is on the fetus?
Well, the bottom line is whatever happens to mom happens to the fetus.
Because my mom, she had 7 kids and she had an old-fashioned doctor and she was tied down during the process. And I'm extremely claustrophobic, and if I feel like, say he was too close to me or something and he had his arm on me, I would feel like, I can't get out of it. That's why I'm sitting on the end, because I can be in the middle and I feel like I can't get out. But I'm doing better with it. But my mom was tied down for each of the deliveries, and just thinking of that can, just freak me out.
And just to come back to you to say, you may have some dreams tonight. You may have some dreams tonight. And if it's all right with you, let them come, because your dreams will allow you to work through it. And that's the same, it goes for everybody here. We have talked a little bit about the birth process, and some of you came here under very traumatic journeys. So just know that your dreams may work you tonight and maybe tomorrow night. So just take care of yourself, and if you need to find me, like You can find Diane, but I also have some cards with me. I'll give you one before we leave tonight. Feel free to call, contact.
Can I just ask, what about the other ones? Like, I don't mean to make it about me, but I had a traumatic childhood. I was beaten all the time and wasn't allowed to speak. Like, even speaking now, right here.
Feel it up here?
Yeah, so I just, I'm trying to get over this. But like, I went to a yoga thing recently, and like, I was crying in pain before, but I went to one now, and I realized there were more tears of joy, and it made me think of bipolar, manic depressive, and I don't know.
Yeah. Let me tell you one more story that's kind of interesting. A woman was a couple, man and woman. They had 2 sons, and their 2 sons were grown and they were off to college. So now it's an empty nest. And so the woman realized she didn't want to get too close to her husband. She loved him and all, but she didn't want to sleep with him. She wanted to sleep in her own room. She wanted to have sex with him, okay, but she didn't want to sleep with him. So they went off to the therapist, counselor, for some sessions, and they did that for a while. And then she came over to me to do some breath work. And so after about the 3rd or 4th session, I said to her, "Are you a twin?" To which she responded, "No." I said, "Is your mom still alive?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Why don't you call and ask her?" So she was a twin. And her brother, male, her brother, died in utero. So it was just her born. She was born first. The stillborn was born second. But Mom never told her because she didn't see any sense for telling her. So there's this thing about being close to somebody in utero who's dead. So,
in the work that you've done, have you worked with people with tinnitus? Do you know anything about
one of the things that Stan Groff said,
What's the question?
is it tinnitus? Tinnitus. One of the things that Stan Groff says, and if you haven't read any of books, it doesn't matter which one you want to pick. I think they're all pretty darn good. But the one, what's the title of the one about synchronicity?
When the impossible happens.
When the impossible happens. Does he go into the itises? Maybe he doesn't. But his theory is that all the itises, sinusitis, arthritis, all the itises can be done away with 3 or 4 breath works. All of them. Because they're all autoimmune diseases, discomforts. So they can all go away. Louise Hayes believes that as well. I think there's a lot of people out there that, in a way, that part of me would love to have an alternative university where we could all kind of come together and talk about this stuff.
Absolutely.
Instead of just being out there and getting all these fragments,
It's costing us too much money, flying all over the place. Let's bring it to the center.
It is being created.
I've got 4 minutes, hang on. There's one more story I want to share with you. One more story about East and West. 7 or 8 years ago, the Dalai Lama brought his physicians to Washington, D.C. We did the very first East-West conference. And it was at Georgetown University. And so the Dalai Lama's half a dozen doctors looked at these 20 patients. It took them 45 minutes per patient. They looked in the eyes, they looked up the nostrils, they looked in every orifice, they played with the urine, played with the feces. It took them 45 minutes, they wrote the diagnoses up on the board. It took the traditional doctors 3 days. Blood work, MRIs, X-rays, the whole enchilada. It was exactly the same diagnosis. Robert Wood Johnson was so impressed they put $20 million into Stanford University to bring Mongolian shaman here to understand and learn about their practices. It's about time, isn't it? Don't you think? It's about time.
Absolutely.
So, yes ma'am, all the way in the back, you had a question.
Two things. Can you say in essence what Stan Groff does that Jackie Small doesn't do in the breath work? Is there such a thing? And the second, what is neuroplasticity? Exactly what is neuroplasticity supposed to be?
I don't know that I can answer your last question, but there might be other docs here who can for you before you leave tonight. But the main difference between Jackie Small's work, which is integrative breath work, and Stan Groff's work, which is holotropic breath work, is Jackie comes from a background that is addictive. It's the addiction model. And so she's got some changes, some tweaks to the process that is more particular towards the addiction group. So that's really the only difference. The music's the same, the rest of the process is the same. But in the training, for example, the facilitators are trained to do things slightly differently. But slightly. I mean, if you wanted the details, I could give them to you, but they're small. They're just small. Yes, sir.
I have a quick question on, we talked a little bit about the similarity between shamanic work and this other work that you're talking about, breath work. And certainly with some of the herbs that are being used to induce certain types of conditions in the body, it's really the body that's doing the work. The drugs or chemicals, so to speak, outside of it are really just kind of grabbing hold of certain things that are already in us to cause these experiences. What is it about the breath work, and I'm assuming it's natural without any kind of induced herbs and stuff like that, that makes it, I guess, similar to what you might expect with trance work, with drumming, and these chemical or plant-induced types of situations? What makes it different?
I'm not sure that it is different.
Okay. Well, I mean, so is the breath work then causing some sort of a change in the? I'm just curious about the
breath work does create a change, very slight, but you're breathing a little deeper, a little faster for about 10 minutes. So your oxygen level is coming in, your serotonin uptake inhibitors are changed, the brain chemistry is shifting off. And then this music, this indigenous music that pressures the cellular memories, brings up from your subconscious up into consciousness, which in a way is precisely what the shamanic trance states and the plant medicines do. They do exactly the same thing. Yeah, thank you for that. It's 5 o'clock. It's 5 o'clock.
You here. If you want to continue the conversation, join us over at Ruby's of Siam on Muskogee and Gulf Road, and we'll continue. So thanks for coming. Don't forget Jim McCartney next month. It'll be another great meeting. He's terrific. Don't miss him. And don't forget your trash. Thank you.